qualitative research. Okay, so if I'm audible, let's start the session off. I just want you to have a look at these videos and feedback in the chat box. Okay, so I will just start with the first video. Just have a look at it and then give your
Yes, Praveen. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, because of connectivity issues, I think I can run my presentation faster, but I would like to take more questions related to it. Okay. So, what is qualitative research? Qualitative research is an iterative process in which improved understanding to the scientific community is achieved by making a new significant distinctions resulting from getting closer to the phenomenon under study. Okay, so the most important words in this entire definition is the iterative process. Iterative process is, it is an evolving process. We are not very much sure what is going to be the outcome of the study. We are it is in the process of evolution. As the study evolves, we'll get to know what is going to happen in future. Okay, and it is improved with understanding of the scientific communication, and it is always a qualitative research seeks in making new significant information. What we get at the end of qualitative research is going to make a significant distinction over a period of time, and we are going to reach to more closer towards the phenomenon under the study. Okay, so qualitative research is basically an iterative process. It is going to evolve over a period of time with our research, and at the end of the research we are going to move more closer towards the reality. The qualitative research is going to answer the following questions. It is going to tell us why people behave the way they do and how opinions or attitudes are formed in the community. It is going to tell us how people are affected by the events that go on around them. And it is going to tell us how and why cultures have developed. And it is going to tell us the differences between the social groups. These are few of the reasons why we undertake qualitative research. There are many ways in which people behave. For example, after the COVID-19 has started, you are seeing multiple ways in which people behave. Okay, so we don't know why they behave like that. What made them to behave the way they do? And it is, we are not very sure how the opinions about a particular event form and how attitudes develop. For example, in the medical school scenario, the students will be having different type of opinions, attitudes. We won't be knowing how those attitudes develop. And it is going to tell us how people are affected by the events that go on around them. For example, the lockdown was a psychosocial phenomena, how the lockdown has affected them. We get to know the information related to all these things as we event over a period of time. And it is also going to how a particular culture is going to be developed. So where are we going to apply this qualitative research? I'm just going to give you some scenarios at which the qualitative research can be used. You are feeling that the patients attending your hospital are not very much satisfied with the services you provide to them. Okay, at that point in time, you will feel like going to develop a qualitative technique and find out the reason why people, are not satisfied with the services that are provided in your hospital. Okay, and there are some students who are not able to catch up with the studies. That is the reason you want to find out what could be the cause for them not catching up the studies. If you go to them with a questionnaire and if you ask them to fill this questionnaire and tell me why you are not coping up with the catching up with the studies, the students may not answer very well. At that point in time, you want to have in-depth information about their inability to not, develop good insight into a particular subject. So for that, you want to go for a qualitative study. There are some socio-cultural issues in patients seeking healthcare. For example, people in the rural areas, they don't seek much health compared to people in the urban areas. And if you look at different religions, and one particular type of a religion, health seeking behavior is different from the health seeking behavior of other type of a religion. You want to find out what are these religious consequences or religious components that are going to have an impact on health seeking behavior of people. You want to assess it. For that, you want to go for qualitative research. You're planning to implement a new research project. What are the factors which favor or what are the factors which are against that particular phenomena? So you want to study that. For that, you will go for qualitative research. And there are a few more questions, a few more reasons I have tried to put it. You feel that, what are the barriers in health seeking behavior among patients with HIV? Once I think, ICMR had invited us to run some qualitative focus group discussions with the people suffering from HIV and ask them, if you are supposed to go to a hospital, what are the factors that are favoring you to go to a particular hospital? If you're not going to visit a particular hospital, what are the factors which are hindering you to visit that particular hospital? Okay. So, what are the reasons why people in, what are the factors in that hospital that favor you to get the services from there? So for doing all these things, we do the qualitative research. You have introduced a new teaching learning technique. For example, we try to introduce something called as Pecha Kucha seminars in our department. And we wanted to know how students feel about that particular method of teaching. So for that, we had to run a focus group discussion and we did some in-depth interviews and we tried to find out what went well and what did not go well in that particular event. Okay, so you have introduced a new teaching learning technique and you want to find out what is the level of satisfaction method about the particular technique, and for that we do the qualitative study. And now you're seeing a lot of myths and misbeliefs of people about COVID-19. You want to find out what are the common myths and misbeliefs of people, and to know about that in depth, for that you want to go for some qualitative research. For that, if you develop a questionnaire and if you try to do the things in line with the questionnaire, that becomes a very difficult thing. At this point in time, developing a questionnaire is also a very, very difficult technique. So for that reason, we go for more of a qualitative techniques. Okay. So am I audible? Am I clear? Could few of you could put it in the chat box? Am I streaming properly?
Yes, you are, sir. You can go ahead.
Okay, so these are basic differences between the qualitative and quantitative research. The qualitative research is a very subjective phenomena. We are more subjective. We give more importance to individuals' opinions, ideas, expectations in qualitative research. But in quantitative research, we are very much objective. We want to measure the things. But here in qualitative, we want to understand the experiences. We want to understand the feelings of people. So the qualitative research is more of a subjective phenomena compared to the quantitative technique. Next important difference is qualitative, we want to construct the ideas. For example, we don't know what are the common misbeliefs of people about COVID-19. And each person will give his ideas about the misbeliefs, his ideas about the misunderstanding. So everything will pile up. It will make a big, huge hump of the information. Okay. But in case of quantitative research, we are more reductionist. Reductionist means out of 100 individuals, 10% were of this opinion, 12% of this opinion. The 100 individuals information is just presented as one number. But in case of qualitative research, you are going to present those 100 opinions as a constructivist theorem, as a constructivist opinion. That is the reason qualitative research is a constructivist idea and qualitative research is a reductionist idea. In qualitative research, you pile up the ideas, you make more comprehensive idea about a particular subject. But in qualitative research, it is more of a quantitative research. It is more of a reductionist. You reduce the information, you deduce the inferences out of it. And qualitative research is going to tell about the phenomena under consideration. It describes the phenomena. And quantitative research is more of a scientific evidence-based. Qualitative research is descriptive. It is going to describe the event under the consideration. And quantitative research is testing that particular information. In the qualitative research, I come to a conclusion that there is some amount of relationship between smoking and lung cancer. But in quantitative research, I'm going to test that hypothesis. I'm going to do statistical analysis. I'm going to apply some statistical tests to identify to what extent the relationship exists. Okay. In qualitative research, you usually go for a small sample size, and in quantitative research, you need to have a representative sample. Okay. In qualitative research, the generalizability of research is not the aim. I'm not considered, I'm not bothered about the generalizability of the results. But in quantitative research, generalizability is a rule. Always qualitative research is told based on a particular context. Someone is putting a query. I'm just going to answer all your queries at the end. I request you to put the queries at the end so that, if anything I've not answered, I'm going to answer them at the end. So basic difference between qualitative and quantitative research is quantitative deals with the numbers, qualitative deals with the descriptions, qualitative deals with the opinions, qualitative deals with the experiences, qualitative deals with the individual's feelings, but quantitative deals with the number. Coming to the next important component, this is a process of qualitative research. So in the qualitative research, we start with the idea. The process, by and large, it is going to be same. The qualitative research starts with the gap in the knowledge. For example, what are the common misbeliefs or mistrust or misinformation of people related to COVID-19? And then I will check for existing information. And then I will come to the study focus. What is the focus study question? And then I will identify what is going to be the type of study design for me in the qualitative research. And then I have different ways of collecting the data. I will collect the data accordingly, and then I will analyze and interpret those results, and I will disseminate this information. This is all same for the quantitative and qualitative research. But qualitative research, we have differences in the method of data collection, and we have differences in the study designs. Yeah. So there are 4 important core methodological aspects of qualitative research. You want to do qualitative research to find out the definition. What do you mean by life for a person who is committing suicide? What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of COVID-19 to a layperson? What is the meaning of friendship? What is the meaning of stigma? You want to find out that information. You want to find out the definition. So it usually asks the question, why? Simple question is, you just ask the people, what do you mean by life? And everyone will give their own definitions of life. Compile everything, and you will get some themes. These are the ways in which people interpret the meaning of life. And sometimes it could be descriptive, which is going to answer the question, why? So in that, we use what are the ways in which the phenomena influences a particular behavior. In the same question, we want to know what are the reasons or the factors the people will get an idea get a sensation that they need to commit the suicide. So what are the factors influencing it? From definition, we are moving a bit higher. So describing that particular definition, why a person commits suicide. Next is interpretive, which is going to deal about a story. Okay, the story is what was the entire set of events that took place in coming to a decision, which is more of a story. It is going to describe how. Okay, and finally critical, what went well, what was wrong, what was wrong in the phenomena, what was the reason, in spite of having so many suicide prevention interventions, people are still committing suicide. So these are the ways in which the qualitative research evolves. Qualitative research first seeks definition, what, and then asks the question why, and then asks the question how, and finally it is going to ask critical. So it is going to, the critical part of qualitative research is a very, very important step that we need to remember. So it evolves. Sometime you can enter directly into finding out how. For example, there is a maternal death. You want to find out what are the factors that have influenced maternal death, and what are the factors which favored maternal death, and what are the mother death took place. So the qualitative research is going to ask all these questions, but most of the time quantitative research is going to find out first three components. It may ask the definition, it may ask the description, it may ask the interpretation, but it will not go too much into critical aspects. So that is the reason the qualitative research is going to seek in-depth information about a particular phenomena under consideration. So these are few of the sampling techniques that we usually use in qualitative research. The common one is purposive sampling. Based on the purpose of your study, you select the subjects. So for example, I want to do the study on HIV infected people. So I will take HIV infected people into my study. So it is called as a purposive sampling. Okay, sometime you want the maternal information about how a particular Janani Suraksha Yojana. It is a program that is by the government of India for improving the health of pregnant women. So at that point in time, we'll be taking only pregnant women into your study. So it is called as a purposive sampling. Based on the purpose of your study, you will be taking individuals. And second could be snowball sampling. I have described snowball sampling more in detail during my sampling technique session. So snowball sampling is usually when you want to do a study on substance abuse patterns. So what you do is you identify one person with substance abuse and find out what are the reasons for substance abuse among him. And then with a snowball, you increase your sample size. And another very common one is a convenient sampling. Based on the convenience you take. And there is something called as quota sampling, which I have already described before. The quota of individuals you'll be taking in your study. And finally, it could be theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling is more related to the qualitative research. Based on the theory under consideration, you'll be selecting the sample. For example, you want to do this, your theory suggests that female sex workers are more at risk of developing HIV. So your theory is the female sex worker. So you will start, you will be more, you'll be trying to identify the female sex workers, and you'll be taking them into study, and you will be exploring more information related to them. So this is what we call as theoretical sampling. I will describe about it when the time comes if you ask any questions. And there was some question on what is the sample size for qualitative research. There is nothing called as sample size estimation for qualitative research. It is absolutely not required in case of qualitative research. You need not go for sample size estimation. So what decides adequate number of subjects in the qualitative research? I'm going to describe it in a bit detail at the end of the session, where you are going to do some techniques for quality assurance in the qualitative research. During that point in time, I'll be describing more about the sample size estimation. So what decides your final sample size? By and large, for qualitative research, there is nothing called as sample size estimation. You need not use any formulae. You need not use any hypothesis. It is purely based on your observations, your feelings, your interpretations, your data. Based on that, we are going to decide what is going to be the sample size. About that, we'll be discussing at the end of this session when we'll be talking about the quality assurance in qualitative research. Okay, so these are few approaches in qualitative research. Sometimes people will ask you, you write a qualitative research paper to the journal, and the journal paper will ask you what is the theoretical research. There are basically 4 approaches. Number 1, phenomenology. Most of our qualitative research is based on the phenomenology. Phenomenology is nothing but you are going to study the phenomena under consideration. What is the phenomena currently? The current phenomena is COVID-19. You want to study what are the feelings of people who are under quarantine because of COVID-19. This is what is called as phenomenology. How a particular, what was the feeling of people, attending your session about the entire session. It is the people are giving their opinion about a particular phenomena. Ethnography deals with the cultural aspects, ethnicity, the race, how a particular event occurs in the race. For example, there are some situations of people that undergoing institutional delivery is not considered to be a very apt kind of a phenomena. So what are the reasons associated with it? And in some religions, the health-seeking behavior is better, and in some religions, it is not so good. What are the cultural factors, the ethnic factors that are influencing about a particular phenomena? There are very difficult cultural phenomena that have been described well, explored well using the ethnographic studies. For example, in some of the primitive tribes of Fiji, the female circumcision was one of a very common phenomena that they used to do. And what are the reasons they go for this kind of a technique? Okay, so they used to go for female genital mutilation. So there were a lot of studies, the ethnographic studies took place, and they tried to identify what are the reasons for it, and they came out with the solutions for that. Okay, that is what is called as ethnographic studies. And next we have something called as grounded theory. Grounded theory as the name ground. For example, what were the challenges of ASHA workers or the grassroots level workers in contact tracing related to COVID-19 pandemic? When they went for contact tracing, what were the problems that they faced? This is a totally new phenomena. COVID-19, contact tracing, everything is a new phenomena. We don't know any information about it. At that point in time, I will go for a grounded theory, and from identifying the feelings of these ASHA workers at the ground level, I will come out with the theory. That is the reason it is called as grounded theory. When you do not have any information about a particular phenomena and you want to do the study starting from the ground realities, you do what is called as grounded theory. And participatory action for research is you will try to develop information about a particular problem in the society by participatory technique, by involving people into it. The difference between the first 3 and the fourth one is, in the first 3, people are going to give you the problem. This is a description of the problem. And in case of fourth one, people give solutions for that also. That's why it is called as participatory research for action. Okay. So I will stop at this point for a minute. I will just invite few questions if you have in the chat box. We will answer them and then we'll proceed further, just to give a break. Dr. Asha, chat box is open, right?
Yes, sir, it is open. I think you can proceed, sir. We don't. Yeah, there are some questions pouring in.
Okay, so there's a question on describing the what is descriptive and interpretive phenomenology. Descriptive phenomenology is, for example, there is a suicide of a student took place in the campus. If you describe what are the events that have actually result, it is called as a descriptive. Go into depth and ask few questions in spite of there are few suicide prevention interventions being present in the campus, why students still committed suicide. So if you look into those critical aspects, it becomes interpretive phenomenology. Okay, that is a reason phenomenology is of two types. If you describe a particular event, for example, if you just describe how you traveled from your college to home, what all things took place in between, so it is called as descriptive phenomenology. But interpretive phenomenology is if while traveling, if some events happen, if you think of why those events happened, so it is called as interpretive phenomenology. Description is just describing, interpretation is going one step higher, and you can just identify it. There's one question on vaccine hesitancy. Definitely vaccine hesitancy is a type of phenomenological problem. So you can just do the phenomenology studies to find out why people did not take a particular vaccine. What are the reasons why people did not take a particular vaccine? And there is one question on inductive and deductive approach together. Inductive approach is qualitative approach. You are going to induce, there is going to be information that is going to pile up. Deduction is you are going to deduce a whole lot of information and you will give it as some numbers and percentages. That is the reason the hesitance, reductionist approach is more of a deductive approach. Constructivist approach is more of an inductive approach. You are constructing a particular phenomena. Sir, is author's perspectives and phenomenology is same. Author's perspective is author's own perspective. It is a single person's description of the event, but phenomenology is more than that. You are going to get information from set of people and ask them to describe the event. In author's perspective, it is only single person's perspective. In phenomenology, it is multiple individuals whose perspectives are put together, and you will identify one particular series of events. So that is the reason we call it as a. Okay, I will just proceed further. I will keep the other questions for the parking lot. So we will discuss about them in a bit detail a bit later. Okay, so now let us come to few different methods of qualitative research. Okay, there are few common techniques that we use in qualitative research. The first one is something called as case studies. So case studies is as same as that of the case reports that we discussed initially. So in case studies, we are just going to describe a particular event more in detail. For example, in one of the hospitals, there is a, kind of atrocity on doctors. What made that atrocity to take place? One particular event is described case study. Case studies have got a little role, but case studies, if they're presented well, they are very important source of information. I was seeing a question in the chat box. The chat box was on narrative review, narrative analysis. In case of narrative analysis, so we usually do the case studies. Okay, so one particular event took place in my campus. One particular event took place in my health center. I'm just going to describe it in more detailed manner. So that case study may not be a particular disease individual. It could be a qualitative case. For example, there is one particular woman. She came to my clinic and she was very happy with the services that are provided. I want her to narrate what all things that she liked about my clinic, and she's going to narrate the whole thing. I'm going to present it as a case study. Okay, so case studies here is more of a qualitative case. The Government of India Human Development Project reports, where they are going to give the case studies related to a particular event. I will tell you one example for a recent case study. Case study of Kerala for effective COVID-19 management. So it is a case study of that particular state. There we are not going to tell these many cases came, these many were quarantined, these many were isolated, these many were cured. Absolutely not. It is a success story. I'm just going to describe what made that particular state to achieve success. It is called as case study of that particular state. I may describe about the case study of Maharashtra, how Maharashtra is struggling to achieve the better improvement in COVID-19 cases. So case studies are going to be more subjective in qualitative research, and are going to describe the event more in detail related to one particular outcome. Okay. So as I have mentioned in example, the suicidal tendency, one child or one student who committed suicide, you will go to him and he has actually retrieved from that particular suicide. So who has been properly brought under your custody, and you have prevented suicide properly, and you want to ask him or her what are the problems that have ended up him in taking a decision about committing suicide. It is a case study related to a particular person. You may think of in your institution, there may be some slow learners. You want to find out what are the reasons for those slow learners. You take one particular slow learner and do a detailed study on that particular student. So it is called as a case study. Coming to in-depth interviews. In-depth interviews are with few people. You will be using a semi-structured list of questions, and you will be talking to them and identifying what are their perceptions about a particular phenomenon. So you will go to a district surgeon and ask him a question. What is a common reason why people commit, why there is going to be atrocities or violence against the doctor? He's a major stakeholder there, and you want to identify what are his perceptions. You do an in-depth interview. In-depth interview runs for hours. And in-depth interview will start with few written questions. You will be first, before going to in-depth interview, you list down few questions, and you will go to that person. You will ask those questions, and you get thick amount of information about that particular questions. And then you will come back and you will identify, ask the same kind of questions to him and get the information. The basic difference between in-depth interviews and interviews using questionnaire is, interviews using questionnaire will be more objective. For example, yes or no. For example, out of 4, what is your opinion? But in case of in-depth interviews, the people have got more wisdom or more freedom to express their thoughts. That is the reason in-depth interviews will get you thick lot of information. You may run an in-depth interview with the Prime Minister of India. What were the strategies for COVID prevention? So it is a set of perceptions that the Prime Minister of India is going to give you. You can do an in-depth interview with the district magistrate. You may do in-depth interview with the people around who are the major stakeholders and collect information. In my experience, I did few in-depth interviews related to why a girl doesn't go to school. Why there is going to be a dropout among girls in rural areas from school. And we identified few school dropout girls in few of the villages, and we went to them in person, and we had a set of questions, and we asked them, what is the reason you drop out from school? And she may say 101 reasons, and we pick up few, and we ask in-depth information about her. One of the reason a girl quoted was, there is no security for girls for going to the colleges. Then we asked her, what are the reasons why there is no security? Then she will say few reasons. And then we will ask her, what are the reasons, what are the ways in which you can assure security for the girls? Okay. So in-depth interview goes in any fashion, in any direction, but there should be one set of questions that you need to have. And based on that, you need to ask the questions. So usually we go with unstructured or semi-structured interviews for the in-depth interviews. It is more of a focused interview on one particular area. Okay, it is going to give opportunity for both the researcher as well as the respondent to be more flexible and discuss the topics more in detail about a particular event under consideration. Okay. The next way of collecting the data is something called as focus group discussions. So please remember, focus group discussions are different from group discussions. Group discussions we do in teaching learning techniques. Okay, so we identify a topic and we make the students to learn, discuss about it. And we would have already given them some amount of materials to read, come and discuss. But in case of focus group discussions, you are not going to reveal the topic to the people, and you are not going to give any background information to them. Once the people, you are going to tell them there is going to be a focus group discussions on internet usage among children, and they will come to the focus group discussion, and you are just going to float few questions and you allow people to discuss among themselves and come out with the ideas. There is nothing called as, you know, a background material is given to the people. People read it and come, and you ask questions to people related to that. So absolutely not. So here is few of the questions related to the focus group discussion. We conducted few focus group discussions on what are the common feelings of people about JSY, Janani Suraksha Yojana. People say, you know, we bring few mothers who are beneficiaries of Janani Suraksha Yojana, 6 to 10, they will sit together and we float this idea. What made you to avail Janani Suraksha Yojana? They start discussing about it. Each person gives the idea, and there is always a flexibility. If one person gives idea, the other person may express his or her opinion related to that. There is going to be a whole lot of comprehensive discussion that takes place about that particular event under consideration. I'll share you one of the example of the focus group discussion that I handled personally. We try to handle a focus group discussion of the parents of adolescent children, and they all came to our department and they were sitting around 10 in each unit. And the focus group discussion started. We just floated a question. Do you think, we need to educate our children using mobile phones? And they started giving ideas so beautifully. Some people said, okay, you say you are going to give mobile phone to children and you don't have any control on how they are going to use it. And they may find something which is not required to them very interesting, and they start searching that information more in detail. And this is a major disadvantage of giving mobile phone to the children. And few other people said giving mobile phone to the children will make them more forward. They get more accustomed to the current changing scenario. They become more illiterates. So that is going to improve their chances in future of getting some better job. So when people float these ideas, there is going to be a lot of discussion that take place there, and they will come out with a conclusion. Okay, so focus group discussions are more iterative process. There is going to be discussion, and there is going to be free discussion. There is not going to be any bulldogging. Okay, so you are not going to say this has to happen in my way. They are free to express their thoughts. Few ashas were called together and they were asked to express what are the challenges they face when they are providing services in the community. They give their own set of ideas. So those ideas will not be there in any literature. Few ideas people give to you by themselves that are very essential. Okay, so what is the perception of students about a particular teaching learning? And in this particular group discussion, you should have a very friendly teacher. If there is a very difficult teacher who is sitting there, people may not express their ideas. Okay, so what are the reasons for patient dissatisfaction? You gather few patients, not in 30s together, 6 to 10, discuss about it, and they will get an idea. There is always a focus on one particular topic, and people will discuss their thoughts and ideas. Okay, this is a major problem with focus group discussion. There will be some person who will be always dominating the entire group, and there will be one person who is sitting here who may not show interest at all. So these two are the major set of people whom to be tackled very, very carefully when you are doing focus group discussion. This person may influence his thoughts on people, and this person is very submissive, and he or she will not agree for everything. At that point in time, your focus group discussion gets diluted. That is the reason in focus group discussion, having a homogeneous set of people, having similar kind of thoughts brought together and discuss the thing. So that becomes more easier. For example, if we are doing a focus group discussion on what are the barriers faced for receiving treatment among HIV patients, I prefer having two gender different for female. And if you mix both of them and express their thoughts, they may not express it. That is the reason you need to have a homogeneous set of people and make them express their thoughts. Okay. So in focus group discussion, it is a collective information rather than having one series of individual observations. You are going to bring people together and make them discuss. Okay. FGDs can be used when there are resources which are very limited and you want to identify a number of individuals who share a common factor, and to it is desirable to collect the views of several people within population subgroup, and group interaction among participants has potential for getting better insights into a particular subject. Okay, these are two examples for the focus group discussion. This is the one which I did for my FAMER project. Here we have people from my medical education unit, and these people are brought together and they're all faculty from pre and paraclinical departments. And I did similar one for the clinical department. I did not mix both of them because their experiences are going to be different. Okay, so here they discussed about what are the common communication skills a medical student should know, and what are the barriers for teaching communication skills to the students, and how we can address these problems. So, and there is one more person sitting next to me, Dr. Arun. He is my convener of medical education unit. He is the record keeper, and I am the facilitator for focus group discussion. And this is one more FGD, one of the students from United States. Her name is Nazma Homidi. She came to me and she wanted to discuss, she wanted to learn about what are the gender disparities in India as per the education sector is concerned. Why there is so much of gender bias where girls are not given much importance to go for higher education compared to the boys. So we had a group of students sitting together and discussing the focus through the focus group discussion. What are the factors that favor or factors that hinder female literacy in India? So she is Dr. Nayana, who is my colleague in the department. She is the record keeper, and Nazma is also doing some activity, and I am the facilitator, and these are the students. Usually if you look at these two pictures, you may appreciate that focus group discussion will usually have 6 to 10 individuals, and the note taker or the record keeper is going to write down the points we discussed. And also, if you could see very clearly this particular picture, there is a recorder. Okay, so we audio record the whole event. Sometimes you can do the video recording also, and then you can write down, you can do the transcripts and all later. Okay, so this is what I was trying to tell. The focus group discussion will have 6 to 8 individuals in the group, and you can conduct several FGDs until you get you get your data saturation, where you feel that no new information is coming. So then you can complete your focus group discussions. So what is the reason in having multiple focus group discussions? So sometimes some ideas are more focused on one set of people. So if you run 1 or 2 FGDs and you finish it off, the perspective of other group of people will be missed. That is the reason you go for multiple focus group discussions and you come out with the ideas. Okay, so members of each group should have something in common. For example, I was talking to you about the parents. We had one separate FGD for fathers, one FGD for mothers. Okay, the gender is more common and more important, common among all, and more important thing is all the parents were the parents of the children who were adolescents, who were studying in the colleges. There should be something common across the group. Okay, and data collection and analysis is always time consuming, and you need to have very, very good skills in focus group discussion. I have experienced few of the problems. We invited FGD facilitators from outside, we are having less amount of exposure to it. And I invited one FGD facilitator from outside, and he was running the FGD. And the problem was so much that the facilitators started speaking more compared to the people in the group. This was a problem. He was in enforcing his ideas on the people in focus group discussion. This was something called as, bulldozing effect. So people did not open their mouth, and the moment they come to know that the person who is facilitating is more knowledgeable than me, then they will not open their mouth. Okay, please keep in mind, the person who is moderating should have a very good facilitation skills. He should have moderating skills. He should have listening skills, and he should have observing and analyzing skills. I'll tell you why observing and analyzing skills are important. I was telling you one scenario before. There was one person in my FGD who was hyperactive, who was telling everything by his own, and he was, imposing his ideas on the people. And there was one person who was absolutely sitting silent. How can I convert this overactive person to bring his, adrenaline levels to the normal? And how can I push up the adrenaline levels among the person who is sitting quiet? This all depends on the competency, the facilitation skills of the person who is moderating the session. Okay? And coming to the next component, this is the focus group guide that we usually use. This is what we call as FGD guide. It will have all the components. Sometime when you are running the FGD, you will forget few questions at that point in time. So usually I prefer doing this FGD guide, which will have all the components. I will start with welcome and introduction. I will describe them the study. I will take their consent, then consent for audio recording, and general instructions related to FGD. I will just tell them this is a focus group discussion about this particular topic, and you are selected on this basis, and we are going to discuss all these things. If you feel in between I am embarrassing you, or you are feeling you are not very comfortable to sit here, you can leave the FGD at any point in time. I'm just going to explain all these things from them for them, and then I will put my main questions. And these are the ones which are in bold letter are the main questions, and the ones which are down are called as pokers. Okay, we are going to poke these questions to them, and people will respond to them as they want. And at the end of entire focus group discussion, there will be debriefing. We are going to tell them what all things we discussed, and these are common solutions we came out with, and are you okay with it? And people will say okay. If they say that you have entered something wrong, this is not the collective wisdom of the group, then you need to delete it off. Okay, that is the reason debriefing is very important part of focus group discussion. And finally, we need to thank them, and we need to go back. And if you look at this particular picture, you are seeing, you may ask me the question, why this person has taken the picture with the snacks on the table? This is to give you an information that there should be some amount of refreshment in focus group discussion and any type of qualitative research you are thinking of, because people are participating in your group, and when they are doing, they may experience a kind of not getting anything back, and they feel that with the discussion, sometimes FGDs will run for 45 minutes, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, they may get fatigued. Okay, to get rid of it, you need to give some kind of elaborate refreshments to the people when they come with the come for the focus group discussion. There is no ethical problem associated with it. You can give refreshment to the people. My guru of qualitative research, Dr. Amol Dongre, he is the one who taught me this, that when you are doing focus group discussion, you need to have elaborate snacks or elaborate refreshments so that the people's glycemic level is going to be maintained, and they are going to be more useful in giving you the information. Okay, so I will stop here for second pause, and if there are any burning questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask. Then we will go for the other part of the presentation.
Participants can unmute themselves. I've enabled unmute option.
Yeah, I'll come to the analysis a bit later, 5 to 10 minutes. Scripts also. Yeah, case study is different from case report. Case studies are going to be related to a qualitative component. Case report is related to a disease component. As Purnima is also telling, she's just added a point to what I was discussing. So, it should be in calm, cool environment, very comfortable with the people, so that, you can run the focus group discussions. Okay. And the focus group discussion should usually, my maximum time that consumed for one of my focus group discussion is say 95 minutes to 95 minutes to 120 minutes. More than 90 minutes, the focus group discussion may get diluted. That is the reason we usually do not allow that to happen more. Young children, more than young children, they're above say 13 years of age. With their assent, we can involve them in the study. We have taken assent from them. Okay, so numbers are not very much particular. So as long as you get the data saturation, you can do the focus group discussions. But in one single FGD, you usually have around 6 to 10 individuals. You need to take written informed consent for focus group discussion, and also you need to take the assent from the participants. Lulu is asking, when do you say that the data is saturated? The one point to say the data is saturated is you are not getting any new information. The point you come to know, usually the qualitative data collection and analysis will be going on hand to hand. Okay, so that is the reason when you come to know that I'm not getting any more new information, that itself says that the data saturation has taken place. And then there is no need to take any more focus group discussions or any more qualitative data. Okay, so as I've already told, one FGD will usually run for say 60 minutes to 90 minutes, and it may touch up to 2 hours. Do not allow multiple session FGD, one workshop on one whole day session on focus group discussion. That should not happen. If you do that, then you are diluting your data. People will, because focus group discussion is a highly iterative process, intellectual process. So where people need to give their thoughts and insights. So that is the reason if they get fatigued, they will not give you the information. They stop giving information. Okay, that is the reason you need to have a very, very important technique is to have maximum around 90 to 120 minutes for focus group discussion, not more than that. Okay, I will just proceed further so that we can have other questions at the end. Okay? Yeah. There is another thing called as participant observation. This is also a qualitative technique. So you are just going to sit at a corner and observe what is happening. You want to know how nurse is spending her time in the ward, how much time she is involved in patient care, how much time she is involved in writing the records, how much time she is dedicating towards counseling the patients, how much time she is dedicating to her mobile phone, how much time she is dedicating to follow her seniors' instructions. So how quality time she is giving to the patients, that you can study. You can study how interns spend the time with the health team members. It's just an observation. How a doctor is communicating to the patient. You sit at a corner and you observe and you make the notes, or you make the video out of it and you analyze that video. There are many attributes. I'm telling, this is different from using the checklist and ticking. You are just sitting and observing what is happening, and you write a descriptive narrative about how that particular event took place. It is just what is called as participant observation. Okay, how a leprosy patient is treated in the community, what kind of social stigma. For this you can use an in-depth interview. If you do the in-depth interview, you may get again bias, because always leprosy patients tend to project themselves as inferior to others, and sometimes they exaggerate the thoughts. At that point in time, you collect the information from the people in the community using the focus group discussions, or you can just observe being in the community. How is it happening? Being a part of that community. Okay, there is always a problem with this participant observation. There is something called as Hawthorne effect. Somebody seeing syndrome. The moment people come to know that you are observing their behavior is going to change. It is going to influence their way of thinking, their way of acting. Okay, so for that, what you need to do is you need to be a part of the community. You need to go and settle with the people, and you need to have good communication with the people, and you develop a good kind of a rapport. At that point in time, initially this Hawthorne effect will be there, but how many times people will do the same thing? And at that point, one point in time, they will say, "Acha, ye aadmi aisa hi dekhta rahega. Okay, fine. Let him see. I will do what I want." That is the point at which people start behaving naturally. You need to have a lot of patience to attain till that stage, then you will, whatever you record is going to be the real behavior or observation of the people. Lot of studies that have taken place through participant observation are ethnographic studies based on the cultural behavior of a set of people. Okay, so it could be either observation of people or observation of environment. We did a small study on why people dispose, what are the ways in which people dispose their waste from the home. Okay, so the government had put some dustbins and all, people go there and throw the dustbin, few people put the waste within the dustbin, outside the dustbin, few people just throw it on the way and go. You know, this is just an observation. You establish a dustbin, what is the level of utility of people of that particular dustbin? Is it recommendable? For that you go for a participant observation. You just observe the people's behavior, or you just observe the way in which people are behaving. And you can either write, sit, observe it, write it down as a description, or you can do a video recording, put CCTV cameras, but always there is a problem with the consent. You should take the consent from the people. Okay. And then after taking a consent, you establish few cameras there, you record the behavior of the people, then you identify how they are behaving. Okay, sometimes if you do the fixed cameras, then people will come in front of cameras and do the drama and they go back and do whatever they want. This is a problem. Usually revolving cameras are being used nowadays. Multiple cameras are being kept. So sometimes people take photographs and do the analysis of the photographs. So these are the ways in which you do the observation, participant observation. And there is another very important and very simple, very commonly used step is called as free listing and pile sorting. We did multiple studies using free listing and pile sorting. Free listing is nothing but you ask a particular question to the person. Why people in medical college do not do the research? Simple question. People list. I will ask this question to 10 or 20 people and they will give their answer in one word. No infrastructure available, no guidance, no money, no materials, and academic work, larger student teacher ratio. They start giving the list and you feed this list to the softwares and they're going to identify top priorities or top problems or the top barriers for that particular problem under consideration. What are the top 10 causes for not doing research by the medical faculty that you will get using the free listing softwares? And using these top 10 lists, top 10 options, you are going to sort them into different themes. So you call it as a pile sorting. If you just take this particular example, these are a few of the questions on what are the causes of malnutrition among children. And people have given multiple responses. And we identified the authors identified top 20 responses and they gave those 20 responses to 10 different individuals and asked them to arrange them in theme. And they arranged them in these themes. These themes will evolve with the people itself. Someone was asking the question, how the themes are evolved. These themes are evolved by the people only. You give those 10 causes to the people and ask them to sort them out into different themes, and they sort them into different themes and you are going to get the information about it. For example, in one of the theme, there is 1, 11, 2, 5 are mentioned. What is 1? Poor cooperation from the villagers. And 11 is something, I'll just take 2. 2 is social and financial problems from the people. And there is something 5, poor health checkup availability. All these things are related to the infrastructure related things, okay, and the social problems. So they are all clubbed together by the people themselves. Okay, this is called as pile sorting. You can just get one of my paper published in International Journal of Community Medicine and Public Health in the very recent issue, where one of my postgraduate, she did a study on what are the common causes of child abuse in the urban community. Okay, we interviewed around 20 women to identify to free list them what are the common causes of child abuse. We got around 122 responses and we put them in the software, and the software gave us top 15 causes of child abuse, and we took them back to the people and asked them to sort them according to different themes, and they sorted them. So we divided them into different themes. One common theme that emerged was children. Common reason for child abuse is children are not very cooperative with the parents, and another reason is alcoholism among the parents. Another common thing is a work stress among people. So these are the themes we evolved at. Okay, so this is a very simple process. I think this is a workshop in itself. I cannot explain whole process in one session, but at least remember, free listing and file sorting is a very commonly and very interactive process of doing the qualitative research. And this is what we call as force field analysis. This is a very simple thing. I usually do it for my postgraduates. When the postgraduates get their dissertation topic, a very simple thing for them to do is sit at one corner and write down, I have selected this particular dissertation topic. To complete my dissertation, what are the factors that favor and what are the factors that are against? For one of my students, when I gave this exercise, her study was something related to costs incurred in the management of dengue. So what are the factors that favor? Dengue is a very common problem. Second, we get a lot of cases of dengue to JSS hospital. Third, dengue, in lot of urban catchment area around our hospital, dengue is an urban phenomena. We get a lot of dengue patients. Fourth, we have a very good medicine pediatrics departments who are very cooperative towards us. They can give us So this force field analysis is going to tell us an idea about what are the factors hindering and what are the factors against a particular phenomena. Okay, so you can do this particular exercise, and it is going to be a great learning exercise. And if you do this for 10 individuals, if you compile everything, out of 10, 8 individuals will be having the same kind of a problem and same kind of a solution. Okay, and another thing, I was talking to you about the participatory research for action. And in participatory research for action, as I have already told, there is going to be a problem. You will pose a problem and people will themselves identify what are the problems they have and themselves give you the solution. I'll just give you one example for this. This is, we are doing something called as seasonal mapping. Okay, so we went to a community in one of the tribal areas and we asked the people about what are the common problems they face in different seasons from January to December, and we asked them to put a leaf on the common problem they face in which month of the year they face that problem, and they put the leaf there and we count the number of leaves they have put, and we come to know that these are the problems in this particular month. For example, in January and February, we have a common problem of winter related issues. And if you come to May, there will be more common problem of gastroenteritis. And if you go to June, July, dengue and malaria are the common problems. These are the problems based on our literature search. But if you go directly into the community and ask the people, what are the common problems? They themselves will identify the problems and they will tell us what the ways in which you can solve them. This is called as social mapping, where people will put the map of their own place and they identify in which areas of the village or the community, what are the common problems. And you will sort out those problems sitting there. So you call it as a social mapping. There are multiple ones. There's something called Venn diagram, Chapati diagram, and there's something called Transact walk, and there's something called matrix ranking. These are different participatory learning techniques which are very commonly used in the qualitative research. Okay, so how do we handle this qualitative data? Always recording is the best, and recording should not be report writing. The note taking should not be compromised at any point in time. Okay, you should record and at the same time you should take the note. And after you record, it should be transcribed. You need to convert it into a transcript. Transcript is nothing but whatever conversation that took place, it should be written as a transcript. It should be written on a piece of paper. Sometimes the focus group discussion transcripts run for pages together. Huge booklet of transcript is prepared. The transcript will have who said what at what point in time. So the whole thing is transcribed. Whatever I am discussing now, some people were asking about the transcript of the talks or the sessions. They're nothing but verbatims, how the verbatims are written. This is a really time consuming event and it produces lot of written text. Okay, so who has to do the transcript? It is basically the people who are actually involved. And there are some people who are experts in transcribing. For one of the projects sponsored by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we conducted 7 focus group discussions and we gave that data to a person who is a transcriber. They are the professional transcribers. They are going to prepare the transcripts and give it to us. And we sit and do the analysis. Okay. And sometime in my focus group discussions are non-funded projects, I myself do the transcript. Okay. So that is going to, in the process of doing the transcript, you will get an idea about what is the common theme that is emerging, what are the codes I want to give. So those things you can easily get when you are doing the transcript writing. And after that, we do something called as content analysis. This content can be a pre-decided content, pre-decided framework. For example, when I am doing a focus group discussion to know what are the experiences of students about a particular teaching learning methods. So I will have some points which are already listed. What went well, what did not go well, how it can be improved. These are few themes I have already decided. And I will write the transcript. I will push whatever substances, content related to those events there, and I will prepare the analysis. Sometime when you are doing the grounded theory analysis and all, you are not going to identify the pre-set criteria or the codes. They have to evolve over a period of time from your data itself. Okay, so you do the coding and you do the categorization. Someone is asking for the coding. What is the meaning of coding? For example, I have a huge transcript with me, and when I'm reading through the transcript, I will come to know that, okay, this particular verbatim or the sentence is going to fit for this particular problem. For example, I am doing the transcript analysis of a focus group discussion that took place for mobile phone use among the adolescents. There are 10 focus groups, and in each focus group, there is one sentence that if I give mobile phone to my child, he may misuse it. And there may be some description about that misusing it. That misusing becomes a code. And this misusing could be because the child is ignorant, because I have not given proper training to the child. That misusing could be because of multiple reasons. So all misuses I will put together and I will give a category to it. Misusing because of ignorance. That is called as a category. And this category and code together will form a theme at the end. What is a theme? Theme is student should not use mobile phone. That is a theme. Theme is a broader area. And the theme is divided into categories. The child should not use mobile phone is a theme. And under theme, there are 10 categories. Category number 1, student may misuse it. Category number 2, there may be problems associated with the internet issues. Third, the student may not become more attentive in his studies. Number 4, the student may learn antisocial behavior. So these are 4 criteria. And under those categories, there may be multiple codes. Okay, those codes could be individual person's perspectives. This is how we analyze the qualitative data. So analyzing qualitative data is a very iterative process. Multiple people should be involved in it. One person should not analyze. If one person analyzes, he is going to induce his ideas or thoughts into it. 4 or 5 people will analyze and they come out with their ideas, and then you are going to sit, the final principal investigator will sit and they do the final coding and decoding, and that is entirely done. And after all your analysis, you come out with the themes. You need to show that to the participants and tell them that these are the codes, these are the categories and these are the themes. Okay. And then they have to verify them and they have to say, yes, this is correct. This is called as member checking. Member checking is a very important. Some people were mentioning about bracketing, which is similar to the member checking. You give the coding to this, you give your entire analysis to the people and they are going to give their ideas and they are going to say whether the interpretation is correct or not, or you interpreted the way in which you wanted. So this is called as member checking. People will do the member checking and finally they will come to a conclusion that this is correct. So this is what we call as ensuring quality in data. Okay, so this is how I have made some themes. For example, the first theme is knowledge gain. After my educational intervention, these are few of the codes student gave, and these codes are all put together, and this is under a theme called as criteria, the codes which are related to participation of students in the class. This is basically on something called as a blunder lecture. We did a blunder lecture and we did focus group discussion based on what was their educational experience using the blunder lecture. And they listed few of their thoughts. And these are what we call as the codes. Each student has given detailed description about it. And I have just taken few points out of them which are commonly aligning. I made the codes. And I'll put all codes together and I have given a theme. These are all the codes which are aligning with the theme, category called as knowledge gain. And these are all codes that are related to the improvement of participation of student in the class. And these are all the codes that are related to bridge the student teacher gap. Using the knowledge gain, participation and bridging student teacher gap, I will come out with the theme. What is that theme? That theme is related to improvement in the learning among the students using blunder lecture as an educational tool. That is going to be the theme of my entire study. Okay, there are multiple softwares available now. They are going to help you in coding, decoding, arriving at the themes. There's something called as Atlas. There's something called Hyper Research, NYO, MaxQDA. There are multiple. I have experience of using Atlas, so which is useful software, and there are many softwares that are coming out. But in spite of having the softwares, it is always better for the researcher to sit with the transcript and do the manual data analysis so that there is going to be a better insight. So whatever FGDs we did, whatever analysis we did so far, whatever papers we have related to the qualitative research, we did our analysis by our own. Computer is just going to assist us. I develop few themes, few codes, and the computer also does by itself. And then we compare both of them and we'll identify which is a better one. Okay, that is always that kind of a process that if you adopt, that is going to be a better option. Okay, so how do you ensure qualitative? I'm just finishing it off in another 2 minutes. So we have something called as triangulation of data. Having multiple qualitative techniques or set of qualitative and quantitative techniques together, collect the data and check what are the similarities across these techniques. For example, I do FGD on a same topic on one set of people. I do in-depth interview on a same topic on one set of individuals. I do free listing and file sorting on the same topic on another set of individuals. And I do questionnaire-based study, survey on another set of individuals. And I will merge all that data and check whether same information is emerging over all these methods. So I call it as a triangulation of data. I've already told you about member checking. Member checking is whatever information you have collected that should be shown to the people, participants, and you ask them whether the information is correct or not. It is going to give the authenticity to your data. And collecting thick information of data and detailed information is going to add a lot of value to the data. We tell the students to do focus group discussions and they will come out with one-page description. This is the outcome, sir. So that is not correct. So you need to have thick amount of information, and that is through that you can evolve the themes and all. Okay. So I was talking to you the data saturation, the point at which you will feel no new information is emerging out. And finally, detailed description of your methodology will help others to follow the same methodology. And if the results are going to be similar, it means that your data is transferable. It is generalizable. That is the reason these are few of the quality assurance techniques that you need to follow when you're doing the focus group discussions. Okay, the advantages of FGD are they are relatively inexpensive and you get in-depth information. And it is always the first stage of collecting the information related to any research. Okay, and information is more close to the actual behavior of the people because you are not doing the survey. You are observing people. You are getting their first-hand information, and it is a constructive approach. You get ideas a lot, and you pile up on based on the ideas, and you understand behavior of individuals and communities. Unique disadvantages are you need to have meticulous planning. You need to develop respond. They will not give their ideas, behaviors, attitudes. Okay. And then handling the data is a very, very difficult task, and results are less consistent and generalizable because they are contextual. Whatever results you get in Mysore may not be same as you get in Delhi. You get in, some other part of the world. Okay. They are context specific. Okay. And they are less generalizable. And people who are obsessed with p-value less than 0.05, they are not going to be really satisfied with the qualitative technique, because one of my department biostatistician, he was taken to a qualitative research workshop and he sat all day in that workshop, and he came and he sighed a big relief. So sir, I came out of that workshop, it was really disgusting to me because they deal with numbers, percentages, mean, median, mode, p-value, and talking to them about the description, they themselves feel it is not going to be easy for them to digest. Okay. And few people also feel the same. And when we ask the people, they say, sir, I did a qualitative question. 10% people mentioned this, 5% people mentioned this, 2% people mentioned this. This is not the way of analyzing qualitative research. You should not attach number to it. Okay. And then it is less relevant for the diagnostic and therapeutic exercises. For example, you cannot get sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value, and you cannot get your p-value if you're doing therapeutic trial. You give paracetamol to a person, you give placebo to the person, and you cannot do a in-depth interview or a focus group discussion in identifying how was the symptom relief. For those things, you need to have the quantitative research. And most of us have got, that is a major disadvantage. And ethics boards are less knowledgeable about qualitative research. And when we submit our qualitative research proposal to the ethics committees and institutional review boards, they will ask us, what is the outcome of this study? Outcome of the study, I won't be knowing in qualitative research. That I'll come to know only at the end of the study. They will say, you write the outcome, then I will give you the approval. So even IEC boards and IRBs, they're not very much convinced with the qualitative research. They need to be really trained about all these things, and they need to be given much idea about the things. And I'm just closing it with a quote from Albert Einstein: not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that cannot be counted always counts. Okay, so I will not describe about this quote. I will leave you with the thoughts for this. I had 162 at the beginning and I'm seeing 162 at the end. Thank you very much. In spite of lot of internet issues, lot of problems over here, so I could you were all there with me. I beg sincere apologies for internet related issues. I had to travel almost 470 kilometers from Mysore to my in-laws place on some emergency requirement. I did not want to postpone this session, so I handled it. So if there are any issues, I'll definitely beg sincere apologies from my end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was a great lecture. In spite of your traveling and poor connectivity, you pulled it off very good. I mean, all the participants were literally glued to their screens. So we didn't see any drop, even though it was almost 1.5 hours. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That is the beauty of qualitative research. If you do it, you will learn more. Thank you, Purnima, for that wonderful remark. Thank you so much. Yeah. Any questions?
Yes, participants can unmute themselves and directly interact with sir, or you can just type it in the chat box.
Yeah, if Animesh sir or Rashmi ma'am, Vijay Lakshmi ma'am, if there are any, if you have jotted down anything, if you want to ask.
Praveen, there's a question where the participant is asking what is the difference between content analysis and thematic analysis?
Both are both are same. There are two ways in which something called classical content analysis, where we do not fix any themes. Okay, and as we move, we get the themes. But in case of thematic analysis, you already have some themes in your mind. For example, I have shown you something here. These are few themes which I had already kept in my mind. This is a theme that I want to work on. And thematic analysis. In content analysis, you are not very much sure about what kind of content is going to evolve over a period of time. Based on that, you are going to, as you are analyzing, you will identify the code, you are going to identify the content, you identify the themes. That is all an evolving process. Content analysis is real qualitative analysis.
Okay, there's another question from Sri Vidya. She asks, what are the criteria for selecting focus group and how do you decide the questions during a focus group?
Yeah, focus group question. I will come to what are the criteria. Criteria is your research question. If you want to do the study on adolescents and mobile phone usage, you select adolescents into your study. So usually we say the people who are more open in discussion, people who are more vocal, people who can share the thoughts, they are going to be the part of my study. Usually when I'm doing focus group, the students, I will send a message to the teachers that you identify few children who are vocal, who are intellects, and who are going to share their ideas. I want their information. Okay, based on my theme, I am going to design few questions. How you are going to decide on the questions? You do some literature search and identify these are the common problems. I want these problems, and these questions are not fixed. Those questions can change when you're discussing. I go with 10 questions to the qualitative research, but at the end when I'm asking, I may expand it to 20. I will get more doubts while I'm discussing, and sometimes I may reduce my 10 questions to 5. I may feel that those other 5 questions have been already answered by the students when I'm asking those 5. So it is all iterative process, very subjective. You need to have experience in structuring the questions and using them.
There's a request, Praveen, if there can be some reference article or book or something which they can further refer to.
Unfortunately, there are very few on qualitative research. Even we search a lot. So there are many. If you go to ME guidelines, AMEE, there are few things on qualitative research, and I will try to put few. I'll try to send few book references for you. There are many. Yeah, correct. But not. They are very different according to the. For example, if you ask for the qualitative research in marketing, you get some books related to it. Qualitative research in business, you get. Qualitative research in health sciences, you have very limited literature. There are few people I have heard they have already started writing books on it, and we will circulate to them. One simple thing I can tell you now is ME guide. Okay,
AME guides, very true.
So that is the one which is the reference material. AMEE guides. So they are the one which are Bailey FP is something which people are putting. So there are many of that kind. So contextual, something which is done in foreign country. The problem with qualitative research is it is context specific. Which is done in foreign country, I cannot adopt the same principles in my own country and in my own place. So you need to be the textbook for qualitative research. You need to learn and you need to do. You yourself develop a textbook in yourself.
Praveen, there's a question on coding in qualitative research from Nahida Nisar, and there's one more question which these are the 2 more questions that we've not taken. One question from Seema Chavan. Please highlight on quantifying qualitative data and qualifying quantitative data.
Oh, very complicated question. Quantifying qualitative data and qualifying quantitative data. Okay, I'm a bit surprised with this question. Okay, beautifully structured. I do not want quantification of my qualitative data. I do not want it. So as a pure qualitative researcher, I want the descriptions.
ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲಿ ಇದಾನಂದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಹೋಗೇ ಹೋಗ್ತಾನೆ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು.
ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ
Okay,
ಅವನು
someone
ಆ
has to
ರೀತಿ
unmute
ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಎಲ್ಲ
themselves.
ಜಗ.
Someone should unmute themselves. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Is there some political discussion coming in? So point is, I do not want qualitative data to be quantified. So as a pure qualitative researcher, I will never like it. Okay. And quantitative data can be converted into qualitative data with thick description for the numbers that you have arrived at. Okay. So that's what we call as discussion section in our manuscripts, where the quantitative data is converted into qualitative descriptions. This has happened in my study. Why is it similar or different from different studies? So there we are qualifying quantitative data, but quantifying qualitative data is not accepted for the pure qualitative researchers. We should not. We should allow it to be qualitative. And coding, I think I've already described much in detail. Coding is nothing but the similar kind of ideas that are emerging out over that particular in the particular transcript. For example, idea related to knowledge gain. I'm just putting all the sentences, all the verbatims related to knowledge gain together. That knowledge, that itself is a coding. So I'm just going to code the sentences which are going to describe about the knowledge gain. I'm just putting all of them together under a criteria of knowledge gain. Coding is a very simple process where you whatever sentence you read, you attach a summary to it. So it is called as a coding.
Somebody wants a brief up on triangulation. Josmita, she wants to know about triangulation.
Yeah, Josmita, I told about triangulation. Triangulation is you are going to use multiple methods and you are trying to find out whether I am getting the same information from different techniques. Okay. Usually we do it. Usually I am an administrator. I will try to identify, I took a new employee in my firm, okay, in my factory. I want to identify how he is working. So from whom all I can collect the information. I can collect the information from his subordinate. I can collect information from his immediate senior. I can collect information from the customers. I can collect information even from the ward boy. Whether all of them are giving the same kind of a remark about him, it is called as data triangulation. Same information collected from different sources, different methods, and identifying whether all of them are giving consistent results. So you call it as data triangulation. Data triangulation is a qualitative variant of consistency, internal consistency in quantitative research.
This question has appeared twice, Praveen. Somebody wants to know cluster analysis, clustering and cluster analysis.
A cluster analysis, it doesn't come under the qualitative research. So cluster analysis is something which is a core quantitative research technique, which is a statistical procedure. In the cluster analysis, what we do is we collect information from a huge cohort, and those cohorts, you divide the cohort based on the responses we get, based on answer to one particular outcome or a variable. We cluster the subjects on that particular variable and we run the analysis. We call it as cluster analysis. For example, when you are testing a questionnaire, you do the cluster analysis. Similar variable, what responses that has got, and we analyze what is the level of consistency within the cluster. You call it as a cluster. It is difficult to explain on virtual mode. So if we interact, I think we can explain it one-to-one. It becomes a difficult thing to explain here. And there is something called as time motion study. Time motion study is something, you know, is a management technique. So where what you do is a patient enters into the hospital, a clinic, and he travels different stations until he or she completes her consultation and comes out. And the patient moves in one particular direction. How much time the person spends on each stations? What are the stations at which the patient spends extraordinary time? And you identify those points and you try to reduce the time that is consumed in that particular station. what all techniques you can adopt. So time motion studies, as the time moves, how a particular person moves in a particular system, and how time and motion move together in deciding the outcome of that particular event. So you call it as a time motion study, and it's a core management technique. So you can definitely use time motion studies if you are a hospital administration faculty. Okay, so what you do is you do a time motion study on a patient entering the hospital, where all patients spends more time. If the patient is spending more time in the registration counter, you increase the number of registration counters. So the time that is spent on the registration counter comes down. Okay, and if it is spending more time on waiting for a doctor, you make more doctor stations. So the time comes down. It is basically to improve the efficiency of a particular system.
Praveen, I think you've taken most of the questions here. Are there any more questions?
There is one question on Delphi technique. Delphi technique is basically a technique that is usually done to arrive at a consensus. For example, if you take the postgraduate training in different institutions, it is different. And can I bring a uniformity in postgraduate training? And postgraduate teachers are distributed across the country. So what I will do is I will prepare a questionnaire with few important questions. I will circulate it to all those postgraduate teachers, and they will identify some common themes. Okay, some themes by themselves. I will merge all those themes. Okay, wherever consensus is coming out, I will retain with me. Wherever consensus is not coming, I will send them back to again those teachers. Okay, these are the places where consensus is not coming out. Kindly give your consensus, kindly give your opinion about it. They will give their second opinion. I will again merge it together, and I'll send it, in that by that time, almost 90% consensus would have arrived at. 10% problems, I will again give them back to the investigators. They will identify what are the areas in which they can come to consensus. I will come back. 99% consensus is achieved. 1%, I will just leave it off. And with 99% consensus, I have come to know this is a uniform way in which postgraduate medical education should be implemented in the country. So this is how Delphi technique is an iterative, again, evolving process. You identify themes, you give to the people, they will come to some amount of consensus, and wherever consensus has not come out, again send them back, again ask them to talk on it, come back. It is a online process. Delphi technique is very much commonly used nowadays in arriving at competency levels in the medical education.
So I think with that, we have almost answered all the questions. Sriharsha, can we wind up?
Yes, ma'am. Sir, thank you, sir, for an excellent lecture on qualitative research. With this, we have almost finished 9 sessions on research methodology. It has been really a great journey. Almost 1.5 months we have traveled through this session. I wish a lot of people who have joined in during this lockdown period, and I hope they have learned some basics, and we wish to see a lot more publications from our country. That was the main intention behind starting this program. I am really thankful to all the 4 speakers, Dr. Vijayalakshmi ma'am, Dr. Animesh sir, Dr. Praveen sir, and Dr. Rashmi ma'am, for taking a lot of pains. I've seen them preparing. It's really tough for them to manage their hospital and managing these webinars. Really thankful to all the 4. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Animesh sir is not able to unmute himself, it seems. Can you unmute him?
Yeah,
He
yeah.
wants to say something.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank everybody. And today, Praveen, I really admire and appreciate that, your commitment. And with all those odds and everything, I think we should really applaud Praveen that he has kept his commitment in spite of whatever personal difficulties and traveling and everything. Thank you so much. And Dr. Sriharsha, thank you also. I think all of us also should thank you because you've also been equally involved and making sure that everything goes well. And of course, Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, Dr. Rashmi. So we all have enjoyed, and this has been a wonderful experience for us also. Probably when we do it sometime next time, whenever, we will be definitely better, and with this experience, we will do much better probably. So thank you for all the participants also, because I think without the participants, this would not have been successful. Thank you.
Yeah, honestly,
Thank you so much.
It's become a kind of routine now. So now Mondays and Thursday will be like we will have to
Empty
readjust.
days.
Yeah, readjust.
Yeah.
actually,
Okay, thank you,
hats off to
everyone.
Dr. Sriharsha and Dr. Bhargav for hosting this webinar. It's just this. I've been quite a few webinars in the creative field also, which they have been hosting for the last 2.5 to 3 months. And each webinar, they have handpicked speakers and that they have chosen, the variety in which these webinars, really hats off to them. They've done a great job. Thank you very much, Dr. Sriharsha and Dr. Bhargav. And of course, thanks to everyone who's been part of this team with me. And thanks to all the participants.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.
All the best to everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.